So I always remember this time when I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a big New York museum. And I was doing a hackathon, and our job was to go into the curators and say, hey, come in, we're going to use tech to make your life better. And they felt exactly the same way, very concerned about their world. Like, wait, what is this tech going to do? Is it going to replace my job as a curator? They were very worried. And I remember at the end of the first day, it was a 2-day hackathon. They sat down, the producer of the hackathon who was recording it was like, I don't think it's going very well, Noelle. Like, they look like they're at an awkward high school dance. Like nobody wanted to talk to each other. And what I realized, I told the producer, I was like, don't worry, it's fine. Like, I got this. We're going to be fine. And what happened later that night is that we sat down with all the curators, and I brought 9 data scientists from MIT with me. And so it's MIT data scientists and Metropolitan Museum of Art curators. The data scientists had to ask one question. And the question was, what hurts you every day, right? Like, what bothers you? What do you wish you had an app for? What do you wish you didn't have to do? And just like most people, when you ask them, how are you doing? No matter how they're doing, they're like, I'm fine. I don't need anything. Like, it's okay. And that was their initial response. But once you build a trusted relationship with the people you're trying to help, it's kind of like, when you ask a question or somebody puts their hand on your shoulder and they say, oh, no, really, how are you? And then all the emotion comes out and you're like, oh my gosh, this happened and this happened. And you just start telling people authentically what bothers you. And that's the critical moment. And I think the interesting part about that is it's not technical at all. It's this trust between the technologists in an organization building something meaningful for those who need it most. We ended up building 17 projects. At the end, we were hugging each other goodbye. Like it became, and I've done this multiple times in high fashion and in farming, where when we first start, people think, oh no, I don't want tech involved in my job. I don't want tech around. But when they realize that it's very, very specific right now, task specific, and that they can choose the tasks that they keep and the tasks that they give away, and that most importantly, they now free themselves up to do more of things. I always call it bring back the backlog, like things that they've long forgotten to dream about being able to do in their work, they now get to think about doing, they now get time to do. I think the only danger to that is that as we free up human time, like a CEO is going to look at that freed up time and be like, wow, let's do more work. And what we're seeing at some of the biggest companies, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, is that they're realizing the power in that freedom is to actually give people more time to be home, to be with their families, to take care of their parents, to take care of their children, or just to think. And that thinking time end up generating more higher value work as well. So it's a bit of it's what kind of ethics is all about. Like, how do we make the right choice even when presented an opportunity to make more money? Do we choose to make more money or do we choose to make better humanity? And that is something that I think every organization will have to face. Another area that I'm often involved in is thinking about people who are, frontline, involved with customers or patients, often in healthcare or finance. These are really interesting areas that AI is very prevalent in. And I remember working with a team that was nurses. And the first time I worked with them, I was looking to augment their capabilities without talking to them. My team, the data science team, we went and we were like, oh my gosh, one of the things that takes them the longest, and this is just us externally observing how they were doing their work, we realized that there was a process called shift change reporting that they did that took them like an hour every time they changed. So we go in and we build them an automated process using Gen AI to manually or allow them to take away the manual work and replace it with this automated shift change report based on observing the environment. It was awesome. Technically, awesome, phenomenal. We presented to the nurses and they were like, yeah, we don't really do shift change reporting at all, ever. And what we uncovered was that we built this system without ever inviting the nurses to the conversation. We just presumed based on pure data that we'd build them something meaningful. And they're like, we'll never use that tool. And what it taught us, there's actually a phrase in accessibility. When we build accessible solutions, we always say, never for us without us, right? You never build for a demographic or for a disability without the person who has that challenge in the room with you. And not just in the room at the end, but in the design phase, development phase, and deployment phase. We broke that rule. Like, I don't even think we understood that rule really when we built this project, but we never invited them to help us design the solution. So I think part of the exciting thing is that you're going to have data scientists who are like, oh my gosh, I totally know what your problem is. Let me build you something. And that's what's happened over the last 10 years. 82% of projects built with AI over the last 10 years failed because we built them in these silos and lobbed it over to the users and said, isn't it awesome? And they said no. And now we realize, especially with generative AI, we don't have to do that anymore. We can build trust with the very people who need our help and actually never build for them without them. And I think that's a critical part of building responsibly. It's often called a symbiotic relationship, that you're a co-pilot, if you will, right? You've got this technology that's going to sit alongside you. I think one of the easiest things for organizations to do is give the freedom for their employees to allow it to be a partner with them, meaning that anytime they're about to start a task, they ask an AI their opinion about the task first. Today, I do it every day. I have a ChatGPT Plus installed on my phone, and anytime I have an idea, I instantly go first to that device and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Now, the important differentiator of that is that with ChatGPT Plus, I've actually customized it. So they have a concept of fine tuning that's called custom instructions. So I've told this model who I am, what I care about, what my personal motives are, what my OKRs or my key results are. Like everything that I care about has been tuned into this model. So when I ask it a question, it knows who I am and what I care about. So I think that's part of the learning process for most companies, is that you can turn on this co-pilot capability, but you can't it's not an easy button. You actually need to train your models on what's true and right for your company. The first question I often ask in any project is I ask companies what their core values are. And it often surprises companies, because they're like, what? Usually they'll be like, the marketing guy is here somewhere. They know what the core values are, or check our website. And I'm like, no. When somebody asks you, what do you do as a business? What is your most important thing? What do you say? And the reason I ask that is because when you build an AI solution and you get your employees to start using it, those core values are going to be amplified, whether you're intentional or not. And it's much better if you're intentional about it, because otherwise you end up getting much more unintended consequences. I think the reality versus the hype is an extremely hard thing to manage. A lot of us who've been in this space for a long time are like, okay, I mean, you're saying that, but how realistic is that, especially for everyone? I think one of the biggest challenges that most companies will face is that the idea is very easy to build and even easy to test, but going from playground to production is a whole nother challenge. And the first thing is that most companies don't really think about human experience. They don't think, and I don't mean like customer experience, which of course, that's definitely, you want to think about that. But even just like, how are your employees interacting? Do they know what to ask? I remember being at Accenture, and when I was there, they had given us a co-pilot. And 70% of the executives that got co-pilot within a month were like, this is useless. If anything, it wastes my time. And the reason why was because we literally threw them into the world of Copilot with no training whatsoever. And so one of the big myths that I try to bust is that you can't use this technology. When you talk to a robot, there's a way to do it. We call it prompt engineering. There's a whole role around this now. It's not as easy as just being able to just talk to it. So I think it's really important, of course, to start that conversation, but to do it well and to do it in production, you're going to need to get very specific. And that actually leads to the second piece. The second piece ends up being around, how do we protect the model? How do we make sure it doesn't lie, that it's helpful and harmless? We easily can do what's called system prompting. We can provide guardrails around what we want it to do and not to do. Most companies, it's kind of like cybersecurity. There's very well-known ransomware best practices. But most companies, especially small to medium-sized companies, they don't even do the bare minimum. I don't know why exactly. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they think it's hard, but these are very easy practices that you can do. The same is true for AI. When you release an AI system, there are just very simple things you could do to protect yourself, but most companies don't think about that. And the simple things you can do to protect yourself are just have a model. For example, in my ChatGPT app, one of my rules is don't tell lies. One of the other rules I tell it is when you come up with an answer, always make sure you can source it and provide me the link where you got the information. But if I don't tell the model that, it'll just make it up because I gave it no guardrails. I told it, just find a good answer. And the job of a generative model is to always make up a good answer, whether it's true or not. So you have to give it that human it's again, like thinking about these tigers, like how do we make sure that these models are being raised in a way that are responsible? When you're training an AI model, good news and bad news comes with that. One, it's kind of like a child, so you're constantly training it. But the bad news is so good because you have the opportunity to mold this model to do what you want. The bad news is it's a child that never grows up. It never comes of age. It never becomes something that you can just release into the world. You are accountable for it forever. And so we've seen these models, Gemini, for example, just out of Google. It was, launched into the world and made some horrible decisions. Now, most models make horrible decisions. That's not unique. What was unique is that it kept amplifying those bad decisions and no one really stopped it until it became a press cycle in the news. So the interesting thing about that is that years ago, 5 years ago, I guess maybe 3 years ago, during COVID, when we saw 5 computer vision models launched by the biggest computer vision companies in the world, Microsoft, Amazon, researchers went to them and said, hey, your models don't see color. They only generate white people. And all of the companies -2 decided to just shut down the model. And the reason they shut it down was because they were like, well, we don't want to be attached to a model that does bad things. But they could have easily chosen, like Microsoft, to just reinvest in it, to actually build a model that works. I always tell people models are never broken, they're just untrained. So when you're thinking about training, it's a constant process because you will always end up getting a user who's not served by your model. So you'll have to change the model to support them.